Great. Well, a very warm welcome to those of you who've already managed to get through the lobby and into the main meeting here. I can see that the meeting's filling up really nice and quickly as others are joining us. So we're just going to give a couple of minutes to make sure that everyone gets in, or at least a good number manage to get in before we get underway. We're expecting, well, we had over 80 registrations for our time together this afternoon, so we are expecting a decent number. Just give a few minutes for people to gather, and then I will do something by way of introduction and get our panelists to introduce themselves as well, because we're very excited about the afternoon or the session that we've got together over the course of the next hour or so. So we're just after 2 o'clock, which is our scheduled start time for this webinar on the GB Road Safety Performance Index. Hopefully you're looking forward to this session as much as I am, but it's a real opportunity to take a look at a new tool that looks at road safety performance across GB, and we're going to be delving into the tool and the report that's associated with it, which has been launched today. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Dan Campbell. I'm the chairman at Agilysys, and I'm going to be hosting this session this afternoon. And in just another minute or two's time, I'm going to introduce the rest of our panelists. But before I do, let me just say a little word about how we're going to run the session today. We've slotted an hour in for this launch of the Road Safety Performance Index, and we will aim to finish well around the 3 o'clock mark. But between now and then, we've got some presentation content. So we're going to have a look at the kind of global context around road safety and how the GB Road Safety Performance Index then sort of fits with a national perspective as well. We're going to give you a quick guide to the report that accompanies the index, and then we're going to give you a run through of the actual tool itself. But in terms of that kind of presentation content that we're going to do just at the front end of our time together, we very much want this to be a discussion. We want it to be an opportunity for you to engage as well. So please do feel to right away in the chat and give your perspectives on the things that we're discussing today. If you have a specific question, and we'd love you to raise your questions for us, it would help me just in terms of making sure that I can identify questions in the chat thread. If you would type in capitals question at the start of your question, and I will try and feed as many questions in as possible when we get to our Q&A times as we go through. But great to see a good number already in. I'm sure we will be joined by others as we go through, but let me just say a bit by way of a quick introduction to the Road Safety Performance Index. You'll see that it's branded as being a part of the response to the Decade of Action for Road Safety, which kicked off formally only 3 weeks ago. Was the formal launch of the Decade of Action with a global plan. And so this is about the UK playing its part in responding to that Decade of Action for Road Safety. And pleased to say that this project has been supported by Towards Zero Foundation, who are the ones who have supported this project financially and how to provide direction to it. It was their idea originally for us to come up with some performance measures around road safety in the UK, looking back, looking at our current situation and looking forward towards that 2030 goal. Delighted to say that PACS have been a great supporter of this project as well, and helped to shape the way in which the various outputs have been developed, and we at Agilysys have kind of done a lot of the sort of the nuts and bolts behind it and delivered the analysis that you will get to see in the report and also in the tool. It's also wanted to just draw attention to the fact that this report and the data tool were also in many ways to recognise Alex Ward, who sadly died of motor neuron disease, and his contribution to road safety. Many of you will have come across Alex both in the UK road safety context and having observed some of his work internationally. with the Global Legislators Forum, with the Towards Zero Foundation, the Global NCAP. I met Alex at a couple of the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety events, as well as that work advocating for road safety. Alex was also engaged in local politics. He was a local councillor in Ashford in Kent, and very much pushing for road safety to be something that's a policy measure being delivered locally. And so when Towards Zero Foundation approached us to develop this project with them, it was very much as a tribute to Alex and his immense investment in road safety and in local politics. And so we want this and the report and the tool to recognise that important contribution that he made. So I'm going to stop presenting slides there, and I'm going to get the panel to introduce themselves so that you get to see who you get to spend an hour in the company of this afternoon. So why don't I start at the top of my screen, and Jess, just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Trung, and I'm the Secretary General at the Towards Zero Foundation. Great to be here with you today.
Great, thanks. And Tanya.
Tanya Fosdick, Research Director at Agilicis. Couldn't say our own name there.
Great stuff. David.
David Davis, Executive Director of PACT. I'm very pleased to be here too.
And Richard.
Richard Owen, the CEO of Agilicis.
Great. So, as I said, what we wanted to do is put this whole thing in context to begin with. So I'm just going to hand it over to Jessica to start with, to really have to see where this fits within the kind of global piece just at the moment. So, Jessica, over to you.
Great, excellent. I just wanted to give a quick global overview of sort of where we've been in the last decade and how we ended up where we are today. So as many of you know, that we're now into the second decade of action for road safety, but prior to this in 2010 was the first call that was recommended that we actually have a decade of action for road safety. And that was sort of came about as a part of the first global ministerial for road safety that was held in Moscow. And as a result of that, the UN General Assembly actually endorsed and mandated that we actually have a decade of action for road safety, and that was officially launched in 2011. And as a part of having that decade of action for road safety, a global plan was developed with a number of key actions to be delivered in this particular decade. So, you know, some of the actions under those pillars were around management capacity, user behaviour, vehicles, roads, and post-crash care. And it was a significant moment because for a long time, road safety has sort of been left off the public health and sustainable development agenda as a key public health issue. So it was a significant development to actually have a decade of action specifically targeting road safety action. And it was because of the launch of that decade of action, it's really kickstarted a number of key activities in the following decade to really help try to achieve that reduction in road fatalities and serious injuries. And the aim of the decade of action was to stabilise and then reduce the number of fatalities and serious injuries that we were seeing globally. And while it's sort of been forgotten on the public health agenda, you know, it's sort of led to a breakthrough in 2015 where, you know, the UN Agenda 2030 included road safety as a key public health issue to be focused on. And we were very pleased to see that, you know, under the Sustainable Development Goals, road safety was being included as a part of Goal 3. Under 3.6, the target was to halve the number of global road deaths and injuries from road traffic incidences. And also under Goal 11, under healthy and sustainable cities, to actually by 2030 provide safe access to safe, affordable and sustainable transport for all. So it may not seem like much, but to have actually 2 targets included under the Sustainable Development Goals was a long time in the planning, and a lot of hard work went into it by the road safety community to make sure that road safety is recognised as a key sustainable development issue. And this was an especially, important development because in the previous Millennium Development Goals, road safety was actually not included. So it was a big sort of goal and achievement for road safety to be included as part of these developments. And you know, as the decade sort of came to an end at the end of 2020, it was sort of becoming more and more apparent that the target of halving the number of deaths from road crashes by 2020 was not going to happen, unfortunately. There's been a lot of great developments and a lot of momentum generated in the past decade, but unfortunately, we weren't really making a significant dent in the number of global deaths. You know, over the years, we've seen maybe about 1.35 million fatalities globally a year. And over the past 2 decades, it's unfortunately remained relatively unchanged, even though there's been a lot of great work that has gone into it. So as we sort of, the decade drew to an end at the end of 2020, it was becoming apparent we weren't going to meet that target, and we don't want to lose all the momentum and all the work that's been generated in this past decade. And what we wanted as a road safety community was to ensure that this target gets extended out to 2030. And as a result of that, the Towards Zero Foundation launched a 50 by 30 campaign with the support of other road safety communities and NGOs, where we were really calling for an extension of the 2020 target out to 2030. So by 2030, at least 50% reduction in the number of global road deaths and injuries. And, you know, that gained significant momentum amongst the road safety community. And the aim was really then to target the 3rd Global Ministerial Conference that was going to happen in Stockholm in February 2020. We were really calling for the ministers to adopt that new target. And then ultimately, hopefully, the UN General Assembly would also do the same. So we were very pleased that when the 3rd Global Ministerial took place in February last year, they adopted the Stockholm Declaration, which did call for this new global target to be adopted. And very pleasingly, subsequently in August of that year, the UN General Assembly resolution also proclaimed, you know, 2021 to 2030 as the 2nd decade of action for road safety, and also announced the new target of a 50% reduction in deaths and injuries by 2030. So that was a really great development, and I guess a win for the road safety community, because it's endorsing the work that we're doing and also injecting, I guess, some momentum back into what we're doing, and hopefully providing that impetus and endorsement for us to continue working on this important public health issue. And as Dan sort of mentioned, this official launch of the decade happened on the 28th of October. And along with that, a global plan has been developed to help as a bit of an implementation guide for countries, and sort of focusing on some of the key areas where countries could work on. And we're really talking about a safe system approach to road traffic injury, where we're not just focusing on one area of the system, but really how we can actually create a system that would gradually eliminate the risks of fatalities and serious injuries, while concurrently reducing the number of deaths and fatalities and serious injuries that we're seeing. So this global plan is available in a number of different languages for all the countries to download and, you know, help guide their implementation process in the next decade. And I guess what is clear, and the key takeaway from this key development, is that this is the strongest mandate we've had in a long time. All these developments together is a very strong mandate for the work that we're doing in this area and for us to do more. And another key takeaway is that we have the means and the solutions to be able to reach that target. But what we're lacking at this point in time is leadership and implementation. It's not for a lack of evidence, it's not for a lack of solutions. We have all that. What we need in the next decade is to really focus on implementing, because we cannot afford to take a business as usual approach to road safety anymore. We've, you know, done that and tried that for the last decade, and we're not really getting to the target that we want to see. And I think with the launch of the index today, it's become very apparent what the cost of complacency is. If we continue to take that business as usual approach, we will continue to see deaths and injuries on our roads. So if we want to meet this global target of a 50% reduction, and this is for the UK as well, we really need to double down and redouble our efforts and try and implement as much as we can the solutions that we have available today. So thank you for that, and I'll pass it back to Dan and David for to give you more of a context from the UK side.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jessica. It's really helpful global context. If anyone is interested in looking at the global plan, I do recommend downloading it and digesting it. We also ran a session just a week or so ago with Jonathan Passmore from WHO, Lotta Brondon from the Global Alliance of NGOs, and Adrian Walsh, looking at what does that global plan mean for the UK. But to delve into that sort of GB context a bit more, I'm going to invite David just to say a few words about the sort of the context that we find ourselves in the UK and why this launch of the GB Rotating Performance Index is therefore important. So David, over to you.
Dan, thank you, and Jess, thanks very much for setting out the global situation so well, and we're really pleased to be part of this consortium for this project. And as Dan says, we can provide rather more of a local input. I think it's worth quickly saying that what Jess described, and particularly the target, I think of 50 by 30, very much Alex Ward was part of that team, Towards Zero Foundation team, and the team and Alex, needs all credit for that. So I think that, so the PAC's president, Barry Shearman MP, he says several years ago, there was a suggestion that the UN might take an interest in this, and it would be a UN resolution, UN General Assembly resolution. I think he laughed at, frankly. He said, no way. And now he's eaten his words, and he's really pleased and slightly amazed. And it's fantastic to have road safety on, endorsed at that level, two targets, not just one target, but two targets, or two goals, I should say. So I think, the other thing, of course, is that the UK has signed up to it, endorsed the General Assembly resolution from last August. So there's no policy holding back the UK in that respect, far from it. So that global context, I think, is very encouraging, very challenging, but very encouraging. We need to bring it down to the UK level. I think this index is really interesting in that for the first time, I would say, for the first time, we now have reliable comparative information over basically the last decade of how casualties have fared by local authority and by police authority. And I think Agilis has done a fabulous job in, first of all, we had to agree on the appropriate baseline. And you might remember that around about 2008-9, the last recession, that did dramatic things to road casualties within a year or two. So depending on how you picked your baseline around that time, it rather affected the outcomes. So Agilis have eliminated that. And they've also taken into account all the complexities of the new reporting system, Crash. So I think, we have now got, I was going to say reasonably, more than reasonably, I think, a system of comparing how casualties have developed over that period. Now, what explains that, why some areas have done so much better than others, we would like to call performance, but I think we acknowledge that it's a mixture of performance and probably local context, population, traffic, urban-rural balance, all sorts of things. And so there is a challenge there for local analysts to try and get into the weeds and work out what's going well or less well in your area. But I think this index provides people with a lot of data, nicely presented, so it gives you a head start in doing that. So it's not the last word, but I think it's a very important contribution. I think the other thing to say about it is we've highlighted the cost of complacency, and of course the index also provides predictions. What will happen as business as usual, what will happen if you do as well as some of the best performers. It contrasts the parts of the United Kingdom. So for a while we've been suspecting that Scotland was certainly in policy terms doing better than England, and now it seems as if the performance has followed through and backed up that policy. So that's very interesting to see, because it's easy to advocate policies and strategies. It's less easy to see how that follows through into performance. But what I was also going to go on and say was that whilst we have pointed out how terrible it is that so many people have died as a result of a business as usual approach, we also hope this will very much inspire local authorities to be ambitious, to set new strategies, as we have seen in Kent most recently, in the southwest of the country, Southwest Peninsula, and in Scotland. And I should mention Wales as well, where mandatory national 20-mile-an-hour speed limit will come into effect in 2023, as I understand it. And Northern Ireland, although that's not quite part of the analysis, has set lower drive limits with an even lower limit for novice professional drivers. So, you know, there are different initiatives, different ambitions and so forth, but there is absolutely ambition within the UK. And yesterday, where are we yesterday? Transport for London published a progress report on its Vision Zero strategy, and lots of very ambitious and encouraging trends as well as policies in there. So there is a lot of good news, and we also want to stress how the last decade has been disappointing in many cases, because the UK figures have flatlined or plateaued, I think is the government's phrase. Some would say stagnated. But if you look back at a longer term trend, casualty numbers have really come down, and we think that is quite possible to get back to that longer term trend. And if we can introduce things like new vehicle safety standards, as Jess has alluded to, if we can get the sort of investment in the local road network that is going into the strategic road network, and if we can get the boost to roads policing, as we're hoping for, and it's currently being fought over between the Department of Transport and Number 10 and Home Office, those sort of things could make it a lot easier for local government to deliver its share of bargain. So, you know, it's challenging, but it's doable. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and hopefully that sort of sentiment of hope and ambition pervades the report, and also pervades the way in which people engage with this tool and start to move forward in terms of that safe system implementation. But I'm just going to ask Tanya now to take us through the report in particular and sort of draw attention to its structure and how that could be used to help you engage with the issues that are raised. So Tanya, over to you.
Are you going to continue to share your, is it easier if you do?
I can certainly share the slides from this end.
Yeah, perfect. Right, and I'm hoping, so I'm going to kind of touch on the methodology and the approach we've taken. I see Craig, who did all the hard work, is in the audience. So if I get anything desperately wrong, hopefully he can put something in the chat or answer any questions for us. And yeah, I won't go into too much detail because it's also in the report. But as David just said, so this is analysis based on DFT casualty data from 2005 to 2019, which was the data set we had at the time. Obviously 2020 is just out. And it's really focusing on local roads rather than the strategic road network, because we wanted to provide insight to local highways authorities, and really it's about supporting them to make improvements. So we looked at the total numbers of KSI casualties and also the rates of deaths or serious injuries per 100,000 population, because we want to obviously be able to make comparisons between areas. And so these performance comparisons have been made over time, looking at the most recent 3 years data, so 2017 to 2019, and comparing that with the start of the decade, 2009 to 11. And so what we've done in the analysis is both look backwards and forwards. So looking backwards, the data was modelled to apply a trend based on performance between 2006 and 2010. The area of this chart where you can see we've had the most progress, the most reductions. And the idea was to predict if things had carried on that trend, where would we have been? How many people would have not been killed or seriously injured if that trend had continued, if progress had not stalled. And this is why we're talking about the cost of complacency here, because what we've got is the black line above the yellow section, which shows the actual numbers, and then we've got that trend of where we would have been if we'd continued, and this represents nearly 40,000 casualties. This is that cost of complacency. Then we undertook a similar modelling approach used to look forward. So where would we end up if we continued as business as usual? So again, this is the upper line, and that takes us up to 2030. Whereas the lower line shows where we could be if we delivered that 50% by 2030. And here, this is a reduction in deaths and serious injuries of nearly 170,000 people. It's pretty staggering. Can we go to the next slide, please, Dan? So the report itself is split into different sections to present this reflective and predictive analysis. So the part one looks backwards, showing the KSI casualties per head of population for the most recent data. And using population data as well, it highlights the 10 areas of the country which have had the lowest risk, and also those 10 areas with the highest risk. And it also explores road safety progress. So again, showing the percentage changes in KSI figures between 2009 and 2011, and comparing that to 2017 to 2019. So again, we've got those authorities which have seen the strongest performance, and also those which have seen the weakest. And then looking forward, we've projected the numbers and expressed those in terms of that 50 by 30 target. So Torbay, for example, is picked out in the report as an example where, based on recent performance and without significant intervention, so doing something particularly different, if business continued as usual, it would have a KSI casualty rate in 2030, which is 3.5 times that 50% target. So it's kind of giving us an idea of where we ought to be heading and how we can achieve, what the difference would be if we can achieve that 50% target. It also shows risk rates per 100,000 people for the lowest and highest risk areas. Rich is going to be demonstrating a dashboard which accompanies this report, and that shows all authorities, not just these top 10 and bottom 10, to see what these models predict for all authorities locally. And it's also done to police force area, but I'm not going to steal Rich's thunder and go into that. As been touched on already with David and Dan, the aim of the report isn't to highlight or shame particular authorities. It's to show the inconsistencies in progress over time. And really, we want to empower authorities by making the most of best practice. So to this end, we've included some best practice insights. Again, David touched on some of these case studies where authorities and partnerships are really making some bold steps towards the adoption of 50% by 2030. And these are supported with what we've called vignettes. So these are views from those inside authorities and partnerships who are sharing their insights into the work on the ground. So what we're really hoping is this report will be used kind of as a bit of a local guide to performance, a starting point for analysts to go and unpick and find out what's going on locally. We don't have the answers in here, we have a starting point. So that's to both understand past progress, but also what can be achieved in the next 10 years. And we've included these pointers of what could be adopted locally in terms of if the actions of best practice authorities are emulated. So hopefully it isn't a case of starting from scratch. These insights and vignettes, which cover all sorts of different topics, including governance, data, performance indicators, community engagement, they should be really useful and practical starting points for local authority readers of this report. Cool.
Great stuff. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, just worth saying we're enormously appreciative actually of those who contributed to the writing of the report through their vignettes. So we've got perspectives of people who are involved in seeking to develop good practice in this area, overcoming challenges, working in partnership, looking to implement good quality performance management structures or governance structures, and they've shared some of their journey with you, hopefully, to help you on the way. So well worth diving into the report and reading those. Tanya, you've kind of touched on this already, but Nick raised a question. He says, great to see release of the document, make very interesting detailed reading. Had a quick read through. Is there anywhere that the performance tables will be available to local authorities so we can see where we stand if we don't fall into either the best or worst areas?
Isn't that a segue directly to Richard and a demonstration of the portal?
I think that's where we need to go, isn't it? Beautifully done. So Richard, over to you. Why don't you actually introduce everyone to the data tool itself?
Okay, well, I'll certainly do my best. It's always great fun to be demonstrating some pretty new web technology in a live webinar that's also using up your bandwidth at the same time. So I'll certainly do my best on this. Okay. Hopefully you've got across, those of you that are here, that this is something that we've been working on for quite a long time. Our first meeting around this was nearly 12 months ago, so it's before Christmas last year. And we wanted to use it as an opportunity to showcase some of the techniques that we've been using. So many of you will be aware that we did work for Transport Scotland on helping them to predict what casualties had looked through to 2030. And we've also done similar work with local authorities because, as has been mentioned, there are lots of, albeit many large county authorities that are putting lots of effort into trying to discover this at a local level. We wanted to know if there was something that we could provide that would enable everybody to have access to similar kind of data, to enable them to compare their performance and then understand what's required for the journey ahead. And that really is what it's about. So we haven't published in an entire league table. We don't like some of the connotations that go with that, but we think it's important to reflect that performance has differed and for people to ask some of the questions about why that might be. And of course, with these tools, it always doesn't provide the answers either, but hopefully it does give people a little bit more insight into what may have been happening on their roads and allow them to compare themselves with neighbours, etc. So yeah, thank you, Tanya, for teeing me up there. And again, another one, big thanks to Craig for doing all the statistical work behind it. There's a big team of here working on the tool here as well. We're trying to not call it a dashboard. We've done lots of work on dashboards in the past. It has dashboards in it. We're referring to it as the index, but it's more of an interactive website that gives you a story about performance in the past, as well as showing what's happening on the roads and what progress is required in the future. So it is a bit of a story as you scroll through the page. So yeah, you can see that as you go on there, there are two main choices for people. You can either search by local authority, or you can search by police force. You can also download the report, and then for the geeks who want to have a look at more information, you can go and have a look about how we collected that. And because we have been working on this for a little while, there'll be some small changes made to the data by DFT. Some of you may have caught Dan mentioning at the beginning that we're using the adjusted severities in here. So we're not relying on the KSI data and the problems associated with injury-based reporting systems, crash, copper, etc. So we've allowed for a lot of that as much as we can do. We also allow for traffic rates and things like that in there as well. But yeah, as I said, all of that's in the report too. I just wanted to thank Transport Scotland as well for letting us use some of their traffic data in the predictions here. So yeah, there might be some minor changes based on recent DFT data updates. As you'll see, the data only goes to 2019 because that's when we started on it. It's an interesting question whether or not we'd look to update it. I think we'd all say that it stands really well as a good summary of what has happened and what's required to be done. I think a lot of us would like to see the DFT taking a lead, perhaps as they did in the past, on targets and reporting on progress. So yeah, we can wait and see what their thoughts are on this. So yeah, if I click on search on local authority, you can see that it takes us through to the next page, and we've tried to make the user interface really clear on this for people, including some instructions. So hopefully it's pretty easy for people to understand. We've also put in some quite direct instructions on how you can find out what's happening in your authority. So it does default to Great Britain, and you can see the map zoomed out. So you can see the local authority progress on there. So where we've got green, that's where you've seen the best progress. Where we've got the grey, that means there's been lower levels of progress against that baseline data. And I'm not going to talk in too much detail about the baseline because that's all included in the report. The other thing that we've got in there as well, because of course progress is one thing, but absolute casualty rate is important too. if I didn't mention, we're all looking at KSI casualties here, and we're always looking at crashes on local roads. That's something we do put right at the very beginning of this. We have excluded strategic roads here. You know, part of our experience of working with road safety data over the last near 2 decades for many of us is that if you have a high percentage of SRM roads on in your local area, that can really skew the results. So we've mainly looked at the roads for which, you know, those key decision makers in local authorities and police forces, come on to them in a second, have much more control over, although obviously we'd hope that people would work in partnership too. So yeah, you can see that whether you've got the darker areas, you've got the higher casualty rates there. So we can just see Lincolnshire popping up. I know it's a big area and it's easy to pick on. That's one that's always had a particularly high KSI rate, certainly in any studies that I've seen. Okay, so how do you get to your data? Well, there's several different ways of doing it. If you're in the A alphabet, you can see that, you know, you can already access yourself, and we could get you to click through next and next and next, but, you know, we've created a search option in there. So let's pick out somewhere as an example. So let's have a look at Leicestershire. So you can see as long as you've typed in the first 3 letters, it'll give you one to choose from. So let's have a look at Leicestershire. If I didn't mention already, and it's certainly mentioned on the dashboard, where there have been recent changes in unitarizations, we haven't been able to capture that because we've looked at that specific baseline period. That's something that would be really good to get people's feedback on, because it may be that in a few small areas in England especially, I think 1 or 2 in Scotland as well, where recent boundary changes have happened, it may not represent the current responsibilities. So there's Leicestershire. Going to click select and view on there, and hopefully you can see this, that it's starting to zoom in on that area, so you can start to see a little bit more information there. And as I've already pointed out, there's a local authority casualty rate, so you can see quite clearly that the difference between Leicestershire and Lincolnshire is already quite significant in there. So let's have a look and scroll through the story as it's presented here. So this is where we see that same chart again, talking about that cost of complacency. And what we've done here is we've put in a very specific figure. So we've said that in Leicestershire, between that period, according to our calculations, there are an extra 233 people killed or seriously injured on local roads than would have been the case if the performance that we saw historically had been maintained. We're not setting this down in anybody's lap or anything like that. You know, we're just saying this is the evidence that we have, and it does vary when you look around the country. We've then got a little bit more information. So if I scroll further down, you can now start to see what this actually means in terms of the requirements for that 50% reduction. So we've got that figure there, which is the 244 casualties in the most recent 3 years within the data. And then if you want to reduce that by 50%, some quick maths there. Yes, that's 122 KSI casualties. And what this horseshoe chart here is showing your progress downwards towards that target. So it's an interesting kind of gauge because it kind of goes from right to left instead of left to right. So what we're really looking to see is this to be filled up with yellow as much as possible. So we've got a central figure here. So according to our predictions, based on previous annual casualties, we think that by 2030 there would be 193 casualties on the roads of Leicestershire, on the local roads. We've also included our confidence intervals on that. So you've got the lower and the upper confidence interval for those stats geeks that are interested in that kind of thing. For those of you that want to visualize this, you can click on the annual casualties tab. So we've got the historic data going backwards, and many of us are used to projecting this forward in our minds by seeing what we think is the trend. What we've done is in orange there, we've absolutely predicted those casualties, and then the 50 by 30 target is shown in green. So a really useful way of seeing where you think you might be and then where you need to be in the future. So that's what we've got for Leicestershire there. Then if we scroll down, you can see some detail on who's injured on the roads in a little bit more information. So we look at a lot of this in road safety, of course, all of us, so what we've done is we've broken this up into 6 categories: cyclist KSIs, pedestrian KSIs, motorcycle KSIs. So largely your larger VRU groups, although we've got other KSI casualties in there, which would include horse riders, of course. Then we've got car occupant KSI casualties, and then other vehicle KSI casualties. So very small numbers of other vehicles that wouldn't be included in there. And because we've carried out this project in conjunction with PACTS as well, what we've done is we've used their pioneering approach, which is to look at the conflicting vehicles. It's not the same thing as blame, but it's to look at the vehicles that tend to be causing the conflict here. So that flips it the other way around. So you can see that cars are unsurprisingly the ones most commonly in conflict, and then you've got pedal cycles 0.7 there, for example. So yeah, many of you will be familiar with the work that PACTS have done on this in the past, and the dashboard that we created for them that allows people to have a look at this at a constituency level. So I'll leave that there for now. What I'll do is I'll just go and have a look at another authority. So let me just pick out somewhere slightly different. So if I just deselect that one and then clear my search criteria, and then let's go for Lewisham, David, shall we? There we go. And then have a look at what the performance is looking like there. So you can see, scroll down further. You can see that the performance hasn't been quite as bad. So, there are only 12 additional people killed or seriously injured on the roads. So you can see that, yes, their yellow horseshoe is starting to fill up because the prediction is to be getting closer to that 58. But it's still not going to meet it. And even with the lower confidence interval means that it's not going to meet it either. So some work is going to be required to make a significant change. And then there's that chart there. So you can see the glide lines for the predicted casualties doesn't quite meet those 50 by 30 targets. And I think if I have a look at conflicting vehicles within there, we can have a look at those. And, it's, some pretty familiar pictures there for many of you. Now, what I did say is that this is available for police forces as well. So if I just show that as well, just refresh the screen here, you can search by police force. So if we pick off another area, so David mentioned Devon and Cornwall there. So let's have a look at them. See, now they're already on the first list there. So I'm just going to click select and view and then scroll down. Internet's not being too bad today. It's working quite nicely. So you can see that the performance, hasn't been as good within Devon and Cornwall. Have a look at the combined casualty rate there and zoom in on that one. And that's just waiting to load. I think it's going to say that it's somewhere in the middle. Yeah, around 43 per 100,000. These are pretty standard figures that are used, and actually it aligns very well with WHO national statistics that are published. And then, yeah, you can scroll down and you can see the same kind of information, but obviously the numbers are a lot bigger. And within Devon and Cornwall, obviously they've recognised this with the work that they've done recently. Progress hasn't been as good, and if it is maintained at that level, then actually we're going to be seeing an increase in casualties. So this is one of the most stark charts here, which is why I picked it on it. You can see the increase in casualty rate in Devon and Cornwall. That is absolutely predicted to carry on, which is the exact opposite of what we need to do to meet that 50 by 30 target. And the gap between those two is quite frankly astonishing. So, they're putting the investment in there because they recognise that if they do really want to make a big difference, and meet this kind of challenging target on the way towards Vision Zero, then significant work is required. So yeah, I can't show every single area. Please do log on. It's at index.agilicis.co.uk. Please do provide any feedback. If you have any queries, look at the report first of all. We've got our email address in there. So yeah, please do ask us any questions, and the most awkward ones I will pass on to Craig. Thank you.
Well, happily, Rich, the first question that's come in is from Peter Bethel, and it's a geography question, so therefore you'll be happy, which is Birmingham listed separately from the rest of the West Midlands metropolitan area?
Hold on, let me just see if I can bring it up.
Right. Well, whilst you're
The answer is yes.
I thought the answer was yes. Or I could have checked that in the background, but I just thought, I know how you love your geography quizzes. Look, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the context that we're operating in, the content of the report, and what is available through the online tool as well. And therefore will give you an opportunity to go away and have a play with that. But what we wanted to do with the rest of our time, got sort of 15 minutes or so left, is to just actually ask some questions of the panel, their perspectives on some of the things that are raised by the report. So, David, I mean, you touched on something earlier, which was about the disparity in performance with some parts of the UK performing better. I wondered whether I might kind of sort of push you a little bit on that. Seems like Scotland really are performing well in comparison, certainly to England. And whether you could expand a little bit on what you think some of the reasons for that performance gap might be.
Well, it is hard, so it is just to some extent speculation, but Scotland has set out some very clear targets, a very clear framework, and they've clearly given it priority from the top. They cut the drink drive limit 5 years ago, and I think a whole series of actions and policy statements and communications have been well, it's great to see they seem to be paying off. Now, whether there are other underlying factors, I can't say, but it's really interesting to see your analysis. So good for Scotland.
Great, thanks. Rich, I wonder whether you might have a comment on that. Obviously, I think you were involved in doing some of the work on casualty projections for Scotland, whether there's any sort of other perspective you want to add there.
Yeah, I think when we see some of the regional differences, those of us that are involved in Stats 19 always have a think about why that might be, especially when people are very different. I think within Scotland, universally, there have been really good casualty reductions. Now, I could say that's because they've had national road safety targets for the last 10 years, which may have influenced thoughts as well as funding. Yeah, they've got a clear framework that has been in place. So I think if you commit to something, if you make that statement public, then it's more likely that people are going to carry out activities to try and meet those targets.
Great, thanks. Yeah, one of the things that I wondered whether might come out in doing this analysis was a distinct difference in performance between, say, urban authorities versus rural authorities. But it seems like actually there are differences of performance, but there are some rural authorities who come out less well, and there are some urban authorities who come out less well, which seem to indicate that there are just different issues facing different authorities. I wondered what anyone's views were on sort of a different response that might be required. So really kind of getting under those headline figures and thinking, how do people move forward in delivering safe system depending on their circumstances? Jess, did you want to come in there?
I might make a comment, and I think it's exactly as you said, Dan. I think the road safety issues facing people in urban areas and rural areas are quite different. Obviously, in rural areas, generally you may have more high-speed roads where people are travelling at faster speeds and having more run-off road type crashes, versus in the urban environment where you're seeing a modal mix of different road users, where you have to take into account the cyclist, the pedestrian, the interaction between all these different mode types. So the safe system principles are similar in that we're trying to build a system that is safe for all and being able to manage the speed and the conflicts in an effective way. And the solutions would be slightly different though in how you would manage the rural setting versus the urban. In the rural, speed limit reductions would obviously make a difference if a conflict was to occur. But it's also that systems approach that we talk about. How do we actually increase the safety of the vehicle and designing the road and putting in place the right infrastructure so when a crash does occur, it doesn't result in a fatality. So in a rural context, that might include speed limit reduction and putting in safety barriers, both in the middle to prevent head-on crashes and on the sides to prevent run-off road crashes. And then in the urban environment is how do we reduce the speed down to about 20 miles per hour, 30 kilometres an hour, so that if there was a conflict with a pedestrian, that they're not likely to die. So it's really taking into those, I guess, unique differences from the urban and rural context and really designing the intervention so it's suited for your type of roads and also for who the roads are designed for. It's very different between the two sort of areas.
Okay.
If I could.
Go on then, David. You come in.
Sorry,
and
I'm jumping ahead of Richard.
No, that's fine.
Just quickly, so I mean, as Jess says, urban, rural, very different solutions, very different problems. But it's also really interesting, I think, to see that there are, as you, Dan, I think said, there are urban authorities which have done really well on this measure, and others which have not done well. And similarly, there are rural authorities which have done really well, and others which have not done well. So if you look at the best performing, we've got Stoke-on-Trent compared with the Shetland Islands. And I can't see, no disrespect to either, but they're quite different. So I think that's fascinating, and hopefully it shows that performance, your activities, what you do to make roads safer and users safer, really matters.
Great, thanks, David. Richard, do you want to come in?
Yeah, a couple of points been made about urban versus rural. I think urban versus rural is much more complex than you can tell by just having a look at the map, because rural roads in Scotland are very different to rural roads that you might get in Berkshire, for example, carrying different types of traffic at different speeds, different traffic volumes, different types of risks on roads. So yeah, I think and the same goes for urban areas as well. So urban Newbury is very different to urban Westminster, and with urban roads, key to all of that is the speed at which vehicles are traveling. And if you haven't got those low speeds, then you need to make sure then there's the protections in place. One thing I was just going to quickly mention as well, we've called this a safety performance index. I think safety performance indicators are really essential to understand, your progress on that. So, this is a lag measure, and it does have some nuances within the data in there. If you're looking at performance indicators on your road network, such as performance about the level of safety on the roads, for infrastructure, for vehicles, for safe road use, that's much more important, I think, for local authorities, rather than looking too far into the past, to say, what the current level of safety is on their roads, and for them to think about the kind of levers that they have to try and influence that.
Great. I mean, if anyone's interested in sort of exploring some of this further, actually, it was a very interesting conversation, the webinar that we ran on Monday with a number of the contributors to the Safe Roads for All report, which came out in the summer, and particularly one of the recommendations in there, and this report out today kind of commends that body of recommendations, and one of those is around developing a good functional hierarchy of roads and selecting speeds appropriate to the function of the road in a safe system view. So that's something I think we're all looking to see emerging strongly as we look towards a future GB road safety strategy and the implementation of safe system. Richard, there's a sort of a more technical question here, probably one for you or Tanya. Amy has asked, just to clarify, data on London boroughs, does that include KSIs on TfL roads, or have they been excluded?
I'm just checking. I'm wondering if Craig or Bruce, who actually did the work, would be able to check for it. I think we excluded TfL, strategic roads, but I was just having a look through the report to see if we included that in there. So I'll make sure that I give the correct answer very shortly.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks. So Suzanne has asked, is the local level capacity to develop and deliver safety intervention a factor, i.e. the level of staffing, training and safe system approach? This is actually something that we were starting to talk about a little bit, just sort of off air, as it were, about how well developed the UK profession and institutions are to be able to implement safe system. So let me throw that back out to the panel and say, look, how do you think we're doing in terms of having the capacity and capability to deliver the kind of safe system that we've talked about? Tanya, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, we're starting. I mean, I think I've done quite a few webinars recently talking about perhaps some of the magic ingredients that we've seen that local authorities and partnerships are working towards. I think when we are working with partnerships, we're not expecting lots more investment. I think it's not about asking people to do more, but it's about embedding and taking on this safe system philosophy, and thinking about the structures and the governance and accountability, talking about indicators, as Richard said, looking at road safety through a different lens and embedding work through that lens rather than working in silos. Thinking about education separately from enforcement and engineering. Let's bring these together with a systems approach, and therefore we should get economies of scale. We should be able to complement each other through a systems approach, and so it's not necessarily about greater investment at the local level. However, yeah, perhaps training is to embed safe systems thinkings from the top down, bottom up, whichever way you want to look at it, so that people all believe in it and are working within that system, is probably a good starting point.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the things that, as we discussing the development of this project that came through very clearly and, is addressed somewhat in the report, is that leadership piece. I think we've touched on it already. And I wondered whether, there's a question both at the national level of, what's it going to take to turn this around? Some of the things that you've already just addressed, Tanya, in terms of advice, guidance, support structures to do that, but also at a local level, what should leaders in local authorities, in police force areas be prioritising? I'd just be interested in, some perspectives from the panel on that leadership piece. What is it going to take to make that shift and move us towards the 50 by 30? Yeah, David.
Dan, you're absolutely right. Leadership is key to it, although of course that doesn't necessarily deliver, but it's a critical element. First of all, we have to have national leadership. So we've seen that from Scotland and Wales in different ways, and we are hoping that is going to emerge shortly from the Department of Transport. The Minister, Baroness Veer, is certainly talking about a new strategy. In fact, there was an announcement in July that there would be a new national road safety strategy, and we're waiting to see a bit of meat on that bone, if you like. And I think things like the roads policing review, things like setting new vehicle safety standards will be very key indicators of whether that's moving ahead. But we have already seen the current consultation on establishing a road collision investigation branch, and that's a really big step forward. And the department would not be consulting on it if it wasn't seriously thinking about setting one up. So that's a major change of policy over the last 5 years, and I think a really key plank in a new ambitious road safety strategy. We would like to see targets, national targets, not because targets solve everything, but it just there is evidence that with targets you're more likely to do better, and it's more likely to lead to resources, more likely to lead to coordination, and a whole range of things will follow. And Paul Copeland's on the call, and he's already, he and local government and ADEPT and stuff have pointed out the importance of national targets to help them locally. So, I think there is potentially a very good context for local government to play into. And I know particular individual local governments have, who have now gone for Vision Zero, such as Kent. They've been through quite a soul-searching process, and is it realistic? Are we setting ourselves up to fail if we say zero? It's not achievable, is it? And they have to be kind of talked through it, reassured it, and told that zero is not an absolute number, but it's much more of a direction of travel and ambition and acceptance that deaths on the road are nearly all avoidable. And we can do an awful lot better. So yeah, leadership.
Great, thank you, David. So I'm very aware that we've sort of reached the end of our scheduled time together. I think there are many things that we could discuss further out of this, and we do trust that this isn't, right, job done, we've launched the report. We hope that this is the beginning of something, that this data proves to be useful to you in terms of taking the argument forward, in terms of building that case for further investment, for enhancement in leadership, etc. Please do get in touch if there's anything that you identify in the data or in looking through the report where you see the opportunities for further collaboration and taking it forward. But I thought it would be quite fitting for me just to finish by reading a comment that some of you might have read in the chat from David Ward. As I said right at the top, this whole project was a way of acknowledging Alex, his life and his immense contribution to road safety and to local politics. So as we come to a close and we sign out, I'm just going to read David's words because I think they're a poignant way to finish. Thanks for the lovely tribute to my son Alex. He would be very proud and delighted that 50 by 30 target is setting the agenda both globally and in the UK. Sadly, Alex was lost to motor neurone disease, but there is a lesson for us here. Last week, the government agreed to boost research funding into this cruel disease by £50 million after a high-profile campaign led by MND charities. So we need to keep campaigning. I hope the new GB index today will support this. Thanks to Agilisis and to PAX for working together on an excellent and path-breaking report. David, our thoughts are with you too, but thank you everyone for spending this hour with us. As I said, please do get in touch if there's anything more that you would like to discuss, but please take this as a kick-off, an opportunity for you to pick up this data, to take the report, to run with it and to use it in your own campaigning, your own advocacy and your own leadership in road safety. The report, the link is in the chat. It'll also be available via the website, as will the recording of this session this afternoon, and all of the links will be available on social media, etc. as well afterwards, so that you can share them with colleagues across the sector. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much to our panelists, to Jessica, to David, to Tanya and to Richard, and to wish you all a very good rest of the afternoon, and we look forward to touching base again soon. Thanks very much and bye for now.